So I wanted to flip the script a little bit. Mark, thank you. It was a great talk. And you want to, can you hear me? Okay, there it is. So that was a great talk, Mark, and it covered a lot of good data. And I think that I wanted to flip the script a little bit and make this talk a little bit more conceptual in nature, because I want you guys to think about spine surgery a little bit differently. So I've been reading this book by Adam Grant, and it really challenges the reader to rethink, unlearn, and update their beliefs, especially in a world that's constantly changing. So as surgeons, we oftentimes get compared to mechanics. It's not a horrible comparison when you think about it. Well, we're both problem solvers. We're both very technical and use a lot of cool tools. And we're often very reactive in terms of treating more than preventing. And some of us also probably a little bit more reactive in an emotional sense too. And both professions can get a bad rep for being overzealous fixers. We're always worried about the upsell, right? So, but the surgeon, I don't want to sound like a moral compass, but sometimes we often forget that we're doctors before surgeons, and our surgical decision-making should be guided by the oath we took. And it's our duty to understand what's important to the patient and educate them all about all treatment options. And unlike the mechanic consumer transaction, the patient transaction is built on trust. So let's just give it let's pretend that we're mechanics right now, and let's try to think like a doctor. So my car is squealing when I brake. The car rolls in, and it's this beauty here. A couple 100,000 miles, been through a few accidents, a little wear and tear. We replaced the rear axle last year, and you do a full checkup. You find out, got worn shocks, aging transmission. You got a front axle that's bent, rusting chassis. So what's the best fix, right? Is it option A, full overhaul suspension, you have the transmission work, a brake replacement, body work, or it's option B, just replace the brakes? Well, if the only thing that's bothering you with that car is the brakes, well, the answer's pretty obvious. But what if I told you the mechanic said, this is what you need, this is how I do it, the other option isn't good, take it or leave it? Pretty sure you would leave and probably leave a bad Yelp review. But this is a reality in many spine clinics. The question I want you guys to think about, are spine surgeons over-treating their patients? And I had to first think, what is traditional teaching based on? And, what about our training makes me think that we may be over-treating? Well, is it a financial incentive? I think the financial component's always a big elephant in the room, especially in the context of higher reimbursement for more surgery and fusions, et cetera. But I think that's a straw man argument. I don't think that's the argument why spine surgery is the way it is. I think it really has to do with a lot of other things. Access. Do we have access to techniques and technology? We just are publishing this paper about the barriers to endoscopic spine surgery around the world. And one of the biggest problems is just access to training and access to technology. But I think that overall, the goal for most spine surgeons is altruistic, because the surgeries we offer our patients, whether it's a fusion, deformity surgery, a lot of them work, and we have the data to support that. But when you think about why that happens with traditional spine surgery, I think it has to do with how spine surgery started, right? It was the imaging focus combined with open treatment, right? On pathology, you see many different symptoms. It's hard for us to really understand and delineate what the source of the patient's symptoms are. And then most of the surgery up until recently is open treatment, right? We're already there. Let's just fix it. Why not, right? It's a good value proposition for the patient. And many of my partners still treat the patients this way. And it's the question: is it over treatment? Are they going to be doing the multi-level fusion for the patient that has a bad disc? They have a spondy at 4.5, with the disc space collapse at 5.1. But what's causing the symptoms? You just fuse both. Yeah, it makes the most sense, right? And then what about the patient that's really, really old and really frail, right? You have that patient, and then my partners might say, well, I can't really treat you. I'm gonna send you to the abyss of pain management, right? So then those patients might be undertreated. So let's take this case and kind of turn into what this clinically be the same, right? So isolated radiculopathy with scoliosis or spondylolisthesis. Well, if you look at the old data, if you did an open surgery on this patient, you're looking at a reoperation rate 25 to 37%, right? But you get the MRI and all you see is this little disc herniation, right, at 5'1", right? So part of what endoscopic surgery is doing, it's making you rethink how you approach the patient. So, and the reason why that is endoscopic spine surgery is a tool that we haven't had before. And it's because the working channel endoscope it's so small, it's 7 millimeters, and it's so maneuverable. And because the field of access and the 30 degree or 10 degree angulation, you can look around corners. And I always show this slide that shows like Mark pointed out, tubular. With tubular surgery, everybody kind of knows who does tubular surgery. The ipsilateral side, you can always resect more bone. It's harder to get to. And if you're not good with the tube, you can actually resect more bone. So the endoscope really does allow us to do more than what we can do with open surgery. It gives us more options, right? And then we talk about, I think for me, the holy grail of endoscopic spine surgery, which I think is the transforaminal approach. You can really do so much, and you can really give the patient a lot more options when you have a transforaminal approach. You can pretty much access the extraforaminal disc, the ipsilateral lateral recess, ventral epidural space, and if you look at the literature, it's the biomechanically the least destabilizing form of decompression you can do on the patient. So we published this paper in 2019 with Christoph, and we always talk about the benefit zone of endoscopic spine surgery. Right? We talk about the benefits of endoscopic spine surgery really increase when alternative options become increasingly invasive and complex. Right? We all know. We always talk about this in different talks. We say, well, what's the benefit zone? I always ask myself, well, what about the early procedure like the discectomy, which is, it's a marginal benefit. And I think about the empathetic zone. And what the empathetic zone is, the doctor's taken on the burden of the procedure, whether it's the training, the time of the surgery, and we're taking that burden off of the patient to give them a better experience. So we talk about, dosing in spine surgery, right? I think what endoscopic spine surgery allows us to do, it allows us to give the minimal effective dose, right? The smallest amount of intervention that's needed to achieve the desired therapeutic effect. But what is effective? Effective for the surgeon depends on a few things. Is it research? Well, is it MCID, in different patient-reported outcome measures? But we have to also remember, like, if you think again, where are these outcome measures from? This is from a time, the 1980s, 1990s. A lot of these disability index we use were developed in that time point. Do they still apply to today when we can actually have the patient have different outcome measures than just the ones we measured back in 1980s, 1990s? And really, when you're starting to get these small, minute differences that might matter to the patient but not matter to the surgeon, you need large prospective data. And that's what Christoph and the ESRG is what we're doing, is trying to get large prospective data so we can really answer these questions. Because we always want data in when it comes to scientific method. What else defines effectiveness? It's training. How were you trained? Were you trained by an open deformity program? You're not going to look at the spine the same way if you train in that program. And obviously, the most important is surgical experience, right? What have you done? What can you do with your skill set? And what allows you to provide the patient the best outcome? But what's effective for the patient? Well, for the patient, pain, right? Some patients can tolerate pain. Some patients are, at the end of the day, they can barely have a needle poke, right? What's the complication profile? Well, we know that endoscopic spine surgery has a very different complication profile. A lot of there's a qualitative difference. It might not be a huge difference when it comes to the major complications, but for infection, like Peter mentioned before, it's 1 in 12,000, or a 70% or 70-fold decrease in infection rate with endoscopic. And the same applies to hematomas and pain. And what about missed work? Patients care more about missed work if it's their livelihood. But for the surgeon, we care about short-term recovery and long-term disability. That's the main things we care about. But I think that when you talk about dosing, you have to take all of these into account. Like whether the patient can return to their specific activities, like if they want to go kayaking or go hiking. These are the kind of things that we can do as spine surgeons today. So that book, I go back to that book, there's this term that I like a lot. It's called cognitive entrenchment. It's a tendency of experts, because we're all experts here, to become so set in their ways that they struggle to update their thinking or adapt to new information. So I really think this is a problem in most surgical subspecialties. We have a lot of experts, and it's hard to update their field, their way of thinking. So endoscopic spine surgery, really, it's providing options, right? So let's give you some options. So this is a 68-year-old female, healthy, call her vintage in terms of car models. She's a former athlete. She's progressive lower left extremity pain and minimal back pain. She's got PI-LL mismatch. What's the cost? I mean, most people think it's fusion, maybe one level fusion, multi-level fusion. You'll see because the foramen is completely obliterated on the left side. What's the cost of that patient? Does that patient really want a fusion? The patient came to me specifically trying to find someone who does not do fusions because everyone who talked to her should either get a 1-level fusion or a 4-level fusion. This is a picture of the CAT scan. You can see complete obliteration of the frame. And again, there's, and you can see this is what I did, the endoscopic foraminotomy. And you can see the visualization. You can see that's the exiting nerve root right there in the frame and right there. So I'm able to kind of get that disc fragment. And then once you get the disc fragment, you can then attack the osteophyte. You can see this is me drilling the osteophyte. That's a calcified portion of calcified disc. This is the osteophyte here. And you can see me drilling the osteophyte right now. And then I like to do this thing where I take the end of the cannula and then chop the osteophyte, called Hassan chop. So you can see right here, this is the CT scan post-op. You can see we did a nice decompression, right? The patient was extremely happy. Transforaminal approach, yes. Let's get another example. 16-year-old male star athlete, progressive back pain, failed 6 months of rest, bracing, and PT. He's being recruited for scholarships. Well, a lot of people don't want to fix this, right? But what's the patient cost? Is this athlete going to lose out on prospects in his future life, right? So, but this is not the vintage car, right? This is a new Porsche. This is Christoph's car, probably. So, this is a new Porsche. This car is not meant to stay in the garage. We can't have that patient and put them out for another year of non-operative treatment. So I wanted to find a way to dose the surgery better for the patient. And using different technologies, I was able to do that. This is what we call endoscopic pars repair. So this is a chronic pars fracture. I was able to kind of localize with navigation, and then you can see this is the endoscopic visualization. Then we kind of pretty much clean out the pars fracture, get all that soft tissue out of there. Then we have navigated instrumentation. We drill, put a wire, and then put a headless compression screw, and then you can then put bone grafting. I mean, that's the best surgery for that patient. I can say that without a doubt. When you dose the surgery, that's the best surgery for that patient. Let's flip it up a little bit. So this is a 43-year-old female active mom of 3. She had progressive right PSI pain. She had an MVA. And then she has pain provocative testing of her SI joint, a positive SI joint injection. What are the options for this patient? What are the patient costs? Not what the surgeon costs. What are the patient costs? Well, we can do pain management. We can do RFA. It doesn't really work. You can see this data. It pretty much teeters out after 3-4 months. So people have really abandoned this procedure. Or SI joint fusion. Well, SI joint fusions do work. But you can look, there's some restrictions, right? You have 6 weeks of partial weight bearing, 13% incidence of complications, a 3% revision rate. So there are some costs to that. So we published this paper pretty recently, back in, I think actually this year. This is the full endoscopic SI joint denervation. And we showed that in 2 years, you had almost 80% improvement, which is unheard of for an endoscopic spine procedure. I mean, for an SI joint procedure, it's not a fusion. And you can see their outcomes here. And some patients had so much pain relief, they want to get the other side done. You can see our outcomes here. This is a quick video. You can see that I think Dr. Shen asked for the approach. You see I make 2 incisions kind of right here. And this is kind of video. And this is actually kind of, I use a little multi-port approach. I actually will then first clean out the soft tissues, and then I will then localize with a needle, and then I'll bring my second instrument in. And you can see then you use a monopolar, more of a shoulder scope, RF blader. And then you can see that you can pretty much get all of the nerve tissue that goes from the sacral foramen into the SI joint. And it's very effective. So in conclusion, I want you guys to all just ask yourself the questions. Endoscopy, redefining spine surgery. Should we rethink how we diagnose? Should we be more precise with our diagnosis and get more selected nerve root blocks? Should we rethink how we treat? Have less of a paternalistic versus more of an honest, open conversation about the cost to the patient. And does the patient, deserve more personalized care? And should we prioritize our core principles as doctors and really embrace the value of the empathetic zone and really transfer some of that burden and cost from the patient to the surgeon? Thank you.